When I first became interested into the idea that there's probably older civilizations than we currently are aware of in mainstream science, the first thing that sparked my interest was as a college student. Someone had just kind of tangentially mentioned that there was a face and possible pyramids on the surface of Mars. Now, obviously, I was very skeptical to this information, just being a layman college student, having no interest in ufology or ancient civilizations. So the idea that there were artificial structures on the surface of Mars for some reason kind of piqued my interest. And while looking into this, I found out that there was one company specifically in San Diego called Malin Space Science Systems. And while attending college in San Diego, I found it very simple to just call Dr. Mike Malin, again as just a college student, and ask him point blank about these structures on Mars. And his answer really made my eyebrows raise even further. He explained that no, the face and pyramids in the Cydonia region of Mars are nothing artificial at all. They're just sand and weather eroded natural objects. Well, as you're going to see in today's lesson, I was able to find several PhD peer level review scientists, and we'll focus in on one specifically, a Dr. Mark Carlotto, and show that this face and pyramids, while on another planet, do merit further study and fits into the overall idea of megalithic structures all over the Earth. If we can find that there are geodetic locations here on Earth of connected megalithic sites, there might be astroarchaeology or archaeology on other planets within our solar system that further confirm these geodetic points, which are also using astronomical markers. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dive right into today's lesson and look at the structures on Mars. We're going to start off from kind of a higher level and just look at Mars in general in some of the science packages that we've been deploying. You can see here that if we look at the difference between Mars and Earth, there's some significant geological differences, but not too much as far as size. Mars is about half the size of Earth, and it doesn't unfortunately have much of an atmosphere anymore, so there are a lot of questions raised about life even being possible on the surface of Mars, but that doesn't preclude there being any type of subterranean life. So for several decades, I guess even centuries now, right, we've been looking into the idea that there's possibly a civilization on Mars, or has there been life on Mars? So it's very interesting to realize that the history of us looking at Mars in awe goes back to even Giovanni Schiaparelli in 1830s, looking at the idea that he saw what he thought were canali, these various intelligently built canals that seem to be interconnected all over the surface of Mars. Now, if that were the case, this would obviously lead to the idea that there was some ancient civilization that was utilizing Mars and these advanced waterways, just like we do here on Earth. So you can see here that we have this area labeled too, Cydonia, and this is really the area that we're going to be focusing on specifically and looking at all the structures on Mars. But there are some very interesting anomalies when looking in this area, Cydonia, not at just the face and possible pyramids, but the geometric and again, geodetic position of these structures. Now, as I mentioned, Malin Space Science Systems is located in San Diego. And when I first started to look into the face and pyramids, it turns out that most of the scientific packages that we deploy, either in orbit or on the surface, are using a Malin Space Science Systems camera. So pretty much Malin Space Science Systems controls over 90% of the imagery that we get from the surface of Mars. And we are going to be deploying several packages over the next decade to do further enhanced imagery of Mars. And you would think that this would lend for clearer images and better data, but this hasn't always been the case. Now, you can see here, based on the scientific packages we've deployed over the last decade, that the amount of data has been exponentially increasing in what we're able to download each time we send a new orbiter or a lander. You can see that we started off with around 15 gigabytes, quickly went into terabytes, And now we're at a point where it's just off the charts with the amount of data that we get for each mission that we deploy. So this would lend us thinking that we would have much clearer resolution of these places like the face and pyramids, and we'd be able to make a hands-down decision on looking at these archaeological sites by just the data alone. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. Now, a lot of the cameras that you're going to see, again, made by Mainland Space Science Systems, some of them are, some of them aren't, but the majority are. And what's really interesting is that you'd think that the quality would improve. Now, what we're seeing is that the ability for these new cameras, even the most recent ones, you can see the pixel diameter of resolution that you get, a per pixel of resolution, that with this camera, we had it at 150 centimeters per pixel, and now we're down to 30 centimeters per pixel. I mean, this is extremely high-res camera that we're able to take photography of the surface of Mars. So the detail we're starting to get is much clearer than even what we had just a few years ago. Now we're also deploying other packages that are not just visual light, but also ground penetrating radar and other tools that look for minerals and various other elements within the atmospheric readings of the surface of Mars, as well as in the atmosphere of Mars. So we're going to be deploying things on the surface as well. And a lot of people ask why we haven't found life on Mars, specifically some type of animal or bacteria. Well, that's not to say that we haven't, but it's not that there's a cover-up specifically around these things. It's more or less a political backup. There's been some engineer working at NASA for 16 years who's built an arm that's going to be deployed with one of the rovers, and this arm can, stick into the dirt and look for amino acids. It can bump up against a rock and take a high-res picture, or maybe drill it, but it can't take a scientific piece of evidence back with us with these current rovers. It's not going to be able to take a sample of some type of living tissue and take it back, or capture an animal. So a lot of the tools that we deploy on the surface of Mars are not specifically geared towards proving life or capturing life. They're looking for the signs of life, certain signs like methane or certain amino acids. So there's sort of a political backup, and then we just don't have the tools yet to scientifically confirm life. But all of the tools and things that we've been using looking for signs of life are definitely pointing in that direction. Now, I can say that just simply because we can look at the evidence. There have been various samples of asteroids or meteorites that have come to Earth from broken off fragments of Mars, and some of these literally contained what people believe to be fossilized bacteria. The same type of microscopic bacteria and life forms that we would find here on Earth, we find from fragments of meteorite debris that have crashed here, that are obviously from Mars, that are now here. So it's very possible that when we actually do deploy the right types of tools, we will discover some type of living creature, whether it be an insect or an animal. We probably have a much richer past on Mars than we think. And I say that simply because of the evidence. And now we are going to be deploying a plethora of scientific packages that will kind of open the door on this question. But I don't think we're really going to know. It's going to take time and sending actual people there to answer these questions. The more evidence we gather, I think we're going to find that there was a rich Mars life in the past, riverbeds, saltwatery oceans, and clear signs that the building blocks of life are present, even though Mars is somewhat of a dead planet on the surface today. At least that's what it appears. Now, a lot of people have asked about some type of cover-up. Is NASA, National Aeronautics Space Administration, possibly also never a straight answer? So we don't really know, but I don't specifically point my fingers at the engineers at NASA. Again, I think that's more of a political backup, in that the tools we deploy to be used on the surface of Mars just aren't geared to actually look for life. They are looking for the signs of life. So anything that's a blatant, artificial intelligently built structure, as an example, is not going to even be considered in the current missions by NASA. Now, having said that, we should at least be aware of the missions that we've been sending, because a lot of these cameras, since the Mars Global Surveyor, which was, I think, deployed in 1998, they have been answering questions on a larger topic of, again, of this astroarchaeology, looking at this face and pyramids under higher resolution and from different camera angles. The sun could be over here in one day, and the sun could be over here in the next day. The orbiter could be passing in this direction, or the orbiter could be passing in this direction. All of these different variables and lighting angles gives us new data to look at the face and pyramids more objectively and see if this isn't just a trick of light and shadow, or what we know it to actually be. Artifacts on another structure, artificial structures on a surface of another planet in our solar system. Now, if we look at how NASA has been deploying some of the tools that they have for high resolution imagery, some flags do get raised in that other areas on Mars have wonderful clarity, but when it comes to the face and pyramids, something unbelievable happens, and all of a sudden the resolution is very badly degraded. Now you can see here that this was an area that they filmed under high resolution, and when we zoom into this, you can see under a time lapse of orbits that in 2002 they took a high resolution shot, and again zooming in you can see this sand cliffside, and then a few years later in 2005 this same cliffside now shows something rolled down the hill, whether it was water or some type of sand that actually disturbed the surface. So very clear geological changes that can be looked at with these new high resolution images. But unfortunately, when we get to the face on Mars, something happens. This first image was snapped in 1976 by the Voyager, and when it came down over the NASA wire live, they quickly labeled it head, and they said that under different lighting conditions in a different orbit, it quickly was discovered to be a trick of light and shadow, and it wasn't really a face. You can see that the shadow angle is coming down here at an angle. Let's keep that in mind. Now, there have been other missions that we've looked at the face and these pyramids. This is the Cydonia region of Mars, and what we see here appear to be a collection of objects, structures that could be possibly an artificial city or an ancient city on the surface of Mars. And we see other pyramids, pyramid-like objects, as well as what appears to be a humanoid face that's over a mile in length and over 1,500 feet high. Very large structures. And again, the angle of the face, the way the light is hitting the face, is a very interesting piece of this puzzle, because there's been many different orbits capturing imagery of this area on Mars. And the sun angle is usually in a different spot every time. The face always still looks like a face. We'll come back to that point. Now, the face, again, has gone under great scrutiny in that most of the imagery of the face, as the resolutions have increased with our cameras, the face has degraded further and further from looking like a face. Here was one of the most recent images taken about a decade ago of, I believe this was done by the Mars Global Surveyor, and the face looks, this is the worst we've ever seen it. But something interesting here, even with the worst image that they've ever taken of the face on Mars, we'll come back to that as well. You can see here that the progression of imagery from 1976 all the way up until recent times in this century, if you will, in this decade, not century, but the quality of the imagery has degraded. It's almost like the face has either been bombarded by weapons or something has happened to it. Clearly, it looked much clearer in the past like a face. So if we took this image in 1998 where it looks like the worst we've ever seen it, we can still get some very interesting data. And as you can see here, focusing on just this strip of the face, I know it doesn't look like a face, but we're looking at just this image, just a section of it. All the other areas that they took of these Mars orbital cameras, the Mars Global Surveyor, we get high resolution images. When they come to the face, this was the original swath. You had to literally do a color correction to get the image that you see here. Out of 256 shades of gray, there's only 64 shades of gray being used when it comes to the face. If there was ever a cover-up, folks, it seems very clear that they do not want us to have high-resolution images of this region. Okay, that's fine. So let's take the worst image that you have and look at under closer detail. If we take the image of the face and just slightly rotate it so that it's looking at you head on, and then cut the image down the center so that you have a left side and a right side, some very interesting details come out. Let's look into this closer. Now, if I take these two sides, right, I have the left side and the right side, and I mirror both sides, you can see that this right side clearly has mirrored facial characteristics, what appear to be eye sockets, nose, mouth, a beard, facial symmetry. But if we take this left side, excuse me, this left side that's less eroded and mirror that, we see details that can't just be coincidence. Headdress, eyes, nose, mouth. Let's look at this under even closer detail. What we see here is very Egyptian-like. It's almost like Sphinx Egyptian. We see a lion-like face, pharaonic type of headdress, a winged disc type of symbol. And again, facial symmetry, eyes, nose, mouth. This can't be just coincidence, folks, that an artifact on Mars has this level of detail from a face that they say is just an eroded object. Again, looking at this original image, you can see that there is data that we're just extrapolating by doing some simple tests. Anyone that looks at their face in a mirror should see an asymmetrical face. So we're not really pulling anything out of the data that isn't already here. Again, NASA did nothing like this to actually merit further study. So definitely some type of Mars-Earth connection, which is another topic that we'll cover. But again, focusing on just Mars, there's clearly some type of evidence and structures that it's been visited by some type of intelligent beings. Now, if we look at the face in pyramids under higher resolution, there have been even new structures that have been found. You can see here in 1976, this small object didn't really catch our eye, but until now in 1998, in more recent times, we can see that it looks almost like a dolphin or a fish and has these small symmetrical lines perfectly situated from each other. Are those natural objects? I don't know. All over Mars, there have been these tubular structures that have been found. Maybe this is some type of subterranean tunnel system. We're really not going to know until we actually go there. But definitely these structures that we thought were a city, filmed in 1976, you can see that the sun angle was coming from this side, as if my cursor was the sun. And here's the shadow. Now, in 1998, we have the side revealed by the sun, and it still is very pyramidal in structure. So we do have to wonder if these were not some artificial structures, some ancient city that would have been at least 10 to 13,000 years, 10 to 13,000 BC, well into our past. But that does seem to collaborate with other structures we have here on Earth, like the Giza pyramids. So yes, it does merit further investigation that now we've looked at these images almost 2 decades later, and we see that the images that were once covered by shade are now visible by sun and still show what appear to be artificial structures. I mean, if anyone were to look at this and say that that doesn't look like a face, or that these don't look like pyramidal structures, I really think that these do merit further study. So there was one gentleman, a Dr. Mark Carlotto, who used mathematical algorithms to look at, let's say, Russian satellite telemetry, images of Russia from a satellite, and could use his fractal analysis to deduce artificial structures, tanks and troops covered by shrubbery or tarps. So when he applied his fractal analysis to the face and pyramids on Mars, some very interesting results came out. First of all, you can see that the face passed all of these non-random tests. It looks like a face in 3D, the fractal test, even the non-random placement of mounds around the face suggests some type of a math. The nearby context of other objects, even the bilateral symmetry, location, orientation, and even purpose is another thing that we'll come to. Possibly the placement of the face right out at the shoreline as a monument that people could look at right at the shore, from the shoreline. But no matter how you look at it from any angle, it still looks like a face. Now again, using this fractal analysis of these just surface area of Cydonia in general, the face and various other structures, you can see we got all kinds of heavy pings, especially for the face, to be artificial structures. And that's exactly what Mark Carlotto's algorithms would do. They could look at this evidence and clearly say that the face and pyramids have enough non-random math that they merit artificiality, very probable to be artificial structures. And so that same type of fractal analysis done on the surface of, Earth reveals similar data, that you can see that these are tanks, right? And actual artificial objects being revealed by these fractal analysis. So NASA never did any type of scrutiny on the structures of Mars, which could show that any type of scientific application to really analyze those structures shows that there is something there, and NASA is not coming forth with that data. So again, the detection results for the city and the face using Dr. Mark Carlotto's fractal analysis shows over a 90% probability that those Cydonia structures are artificial. Now, there are other things all over the surface of Mars that you can look at, even by using some of the most current NASA links. They are continuing to put up imagery that they capture from the surface of Mars. That doesn't mean that it's desensitized or it hasn't been scrubbed, but there is enough of it that even golf ball-like objects and various other things that are now starting to look like plant life, possibly running water on the surface of Mars. So we're definitely going to explore in future lessons how Mars is shaping up based on the evidence to be not such a dead planet. Now, a few other anomalous things that have happened around Mars had to do when Russian satellites started to investigate and approach Mars. They did send Phobos 1 and Phobos 2, a couple of orbiters to look and take telemetry. And a very interesting thing happened when one of their orbiters, the Phobos 2 probe, started to approach the moonlet of Mars called Phobos, and they started to bounce radar off of the moon of Phobos, and all of a sudden they lost their satellite. And the last frame transmitted by the satellite was this. And what you see here is the moonlet of Phobos, Mars's moonlet, and some strange looking energy beam. And it's not coming from the satellite. It's coming from the moonlet. And that was the last image the satellite captured before it went offline. Something interfered with the satellite from Russia, and it could have been because they were bombarding laser beams on the surface of Phobos, and whatever was on Phobos said, "We don't like you hitting us with your laser beams." Now, other things the Russians captured was this huge, what appears to be a shadow on the surface of Mars. Now, they're looking at this through radar, through infrared radar, so this isn't on the surface, but something was right above the surface of Mars making this shadow. What could that be? To me, it looks like a large UFO. So there have been some very interesting media that have come out over the years. This was a mockumentary, not a real documentary, a mockumentary that hit on some very interesting points that are possibly reality. So not a real video, not real footage, but showed some possibly very real things. One of them was that there's a whole cover-up about our space program, and that we landed on the moon and Mars years ago, and that the Russians even landed on Mars back in the 60s. Here's a small clip from this mockumentary of us landing on Mars, and a surprise when we get there at the very end. Remember, this is 1963, folks. So this is a Russian landing on the surface of Mars in 1960s. Again, from a mockumentary, Probably not real. Pay attention what happens when they land. I found this particularly interesting. We have life. Well, more than likely, folks, we have visited Mars, in my personal opinion, but we can only go on the data at this point. We have to keep it scientific. Even though the field of ufology shows us this face and pyramids could possibly exist, we're starting to find that civilizations here on Earth go well beyond 10,000 BC, possibly to 50,000 BC. So if there was some ancient civilization that was very advanced here on Earth, maybe they were possibly off Earth as well. Now we are seeing a lot of geological evidence to see that Mars does have frozen water all over the surface, and that flowing water was very abundant in the past. This proves in a very likely manner that life did thrive at one time on the surface of Mars. And all of the evidence that we're seeing geologically is that there's possibly even flowing water there now. These are literally frame grabs of geological changes from current telemetry of Mars that show movements in what appear to be water on the surface of Mars. And other areas show the same types of lake beds and saltwatery past of things that we have here on Earth. All of the things show that life arose out of the oceans here on Earth. That also could have been the case on Mars. So not really sure if we're ever going to be able to answer whether or not there's life on Mars, or if our origins go further back on Mars than we currently think. But sending people there will definitely answer the question. And I really hope that within our lifetime we do revisit Mars as a culture, because it might show just how far back our past really does go.